Chapter 24. Moments later. The Power Stone armor saved him. Quises clutched his legs as tightly as a bug's carapace and kept them from shattering when his feet hit ground. Cuirasses compressed his torso in a deep exhalation as he rolled down the sandy slope. Helmet and boots flung up banners of sand in long looping swaths around him while he tumbled. Shrapnel followed him in a scouring rain. Bits of yataghan bombarded the armor and fought to slice into the men within. Glacian's designs were too perfect, and Yawgmoth was not destined to die that day. The tumbling roll ended at the bottom of the bank against a tangle of scrub. An ornate hunk of sextant pattered to a stop beside a complex section of nasal cavity. Among the larger pieces of debris was a THRAN officer, likely the captain of the ship he had staved. The man was killed instantly on impact, but he kept rolling for some time, swathed in the white burnous of the invading armies. Yawgmoth stared irritably at the man. He glanced up at the sparking wall of the city above. Rip his eyes out. Though the helmet had saved his life, Yawgmoth hauled the gritty thing from his head and flung it away. It spun atop the sand, took a hop, and landed in the broken arm of the fallen captain. Taking a deep breath, Yawgmoth stood. Dust poured from him. He seemed a ghost rising from the desert. Perhaps the Halcydes would think him slain. Perhaps he would see what they would do in his absence. He strode up the bank and looked back, hoping to see other survivors enough to form a loyal band. Instead, he saw THRAN soldiers swarm the mirror arrays. They were as thick as ants on the distant devices. Cudgels and battle axes fell in the morning light, smashing reflectors even as the sun awakening across them. The array teams and their Phyrexian defenders were overrun, slaughtered. In moments, one whole array was destroyed. Shards of glass made a gaudy spectacle in the sand. Other arrays were falling. 2 had been lost during the night. Now the other 7 were smashed one by one. That meant no solar gun. That meant no more orbs charged until the war was done. That meant no new power stone cores, no new implosion bombs, no new ray cannon batteries. It might have ended the war just then for a lesser commander. Yawgmoth had stockpiled power stones, and his greatest weapons were even then being assembled on the second sphere of Phyrexia. The THRAN bashers concluded their work. Gathering beyond the shattered mirrors, they began a steady march eastward, toward Halcyon. Toward Yawgmoth. He descended the sand bank. He would have just enough time to strip the THRAN captain of his burnous and insignias. They would fit well enough over Yawgmoth's power stone armor. The rest of the man could be buried, with only his helmeted head jutting from the sand. It would be enough to fool the THRAN troops. Yawgmoth would accompany them to the base of the extrusion and begin the climb. He would destroy a whole contingent of the THRAN army and rise, resurrected, into his city. And tear the gunners' eyes out. Lord Yawgmoth's ship went down, the breathless courier panted rapidly. She paused, calming her voice. All hands and our ruler are presumed dead. Commander Jix stared out at the garrison of his Phyrexian guard. It would take hours to deploy the ground forces, what with the ruined lift. The Phyrexian steeplejacks, though, could climb to the exit port in minutes. They were amazing fighters, folk with the general body configuration of sloths but the speed of horses. They could gallop across cliff faces as if they were planes. Steeplejacks were smart too. Their human intelligence was quickened by a cannibal wit. They only looked ignorant because of the simian spread of their lower faces, allowing a toothy jaw wide enough to bite off their victims' heads. "Excuse me, Commander. Did you hear? Lord Yawgmoth is presumed dead." "Never presume Yawgmoth dead," Jix replied levelly. "He is not. I would know. I would sense it." "I was told to await your orders," the young woman said, dipping her head in apology. "My orders?" Jix began, and then realized he was next in command. "My orders to whom? Who sent you with this message?" "The commander of the Halcite Guard, of course." The commander does not know how to deploy his forces, how to fire his guns, how to drop his bombs. Of course he does, stammered the courier. But he instructed me to ask if Lord Yawgmoth's presumed condition might cause a change in military policy. Jix's eyes flared. Surrender? The commander of the Halcite Guard wants me to consider surrender. He only indicates that every option is yours. He is a coward and a traitor unworthy of his post. A keen smile filled Jix's face. Yes. Every option. My orders are these. The commander of the Halcite Guard must resign immediately. I am taking command of his forces. The courier had nothing to say to that. I am leading my Phyrexian Guard into the city. You will accompany us as we ascend. Deliver your message to the commander in my presence. I want you to have a weapon ready. If he does not surrender to my custody, I want you to slay him. He will not be expecting it from you. Understood? Yes, Commander, the courier said, eyes lowered. Permission to speak. Granted. What will happen to the commander, sir? Jix's smile deepened. Perhaps he can be rehabilitated here in Phyrexia. Perhaps he can become a great Phyrexian warrior. If he does not surrender, you will kill him. Yes, Commander, the courier replied, hand on the dagger at her waist. Lord Yawgmoth is no longer presumed dead. My steeplejacks will recover him. Yes, Commander. Jix tenderly lifted her head. His own fingers were tipped now with claw-like nails. In her innocent eyes, he saw his reflection menacing and inhuman. At least there was that smile. Perhaps the commander has no merit, but if you do, my dear, you may well have a place among us. Yes, Commander. Yawgmoth climbed among an elite team of elf invaders. The elves were accustomed to scaling magniga trees, not walls of cold stone. The morning sun cast the west cliff in shadow. These elves would have withered on the east cliff. Here they swarmed like lice. They hoped to reach the summit before midday, when the sun would overtake them and turn the cliff into a skillet. Of course, some had no hope of reaching the summit at all. Let go of my ankle. What are you trying to do? They were rather paltry last words for an elf. These long-lived folk should die with epic poems on their lips. This was the third who died whining. Actually, he didn't die whining. He merely lost his grip of the rock and fell, whining. Then came a sustained wail with an abrupt end. Whining or wailing, it seemed a poor way to die. Yawgmoth paused to watch. The elf became a puff of dust and a little red mark on the ground. Yawgmoth climbed again, using the handholds the elf had used. Good holds were critical. The cliff face leaned outward, which made it difficult climbing but prevented defenders from dropping rocks on their heads. Even the road that rose up the extrusion avoided this face of stone for lack of footing. It was the obvious choice for a vertical assault, but a difficult climb. Yawgmoth was glad for the power stone armor breathing deeply for him beneath the burnous. He was also glad these elves had thought him merely clumsy, stupid, inept, merely human. Otherwise, the 3 slips that had happened while he was nearby might not have seemed accidents. Dare I attempt a 4th? Yawgmoth wondered to himself as he climbed a slanting crack. Why not? His foot dislodged a jagged hunk of basalt. The rock bounded down, catching an elf squarely in the forehead. The impact made a wet crack. Wide green eyes closed. Attenuated fingers slid loose. The elf peeled away from the cliff face just like a leaf from a wall. He tumbled most beautifully of all, laid out fully. The killing stone rested like a rakish crown on his staved forehead. Enough, came a shrill voice above Yawgmoth. It was an elf warrior woman. She had looped a length of silken rope about a jutting stone and wrapped it around her wrist. Her legs were folded in a crouch against the rock wall, and she glared down at Yawgmoth. Enough. Move away from us. Ally or not, You humans are so stupid you might as well be agents of her. Rant broke off. Wide lavender eyes grew wider still. What is that? Under your burnous, what is that? Yawgmoth glanced down to see the power stone armor gleaming beneath the open neck of his robes. He drew the throat closed, sensing other elves climbing up around him. What is it? Just a souvenir. A trophy, really. I got it from that crashed ship back there. They say this stuff stops arrows and swords and everything. The elf woman's eyes narrowed, and the emotion behind them shifted. Souvenirs. Grave robber. Human scum. No wonder you are such a clod. Wearing 50 pounds of armor. Who needs armor on a climb like this? What is that? What is what? She yelled. Mistress Rebek, said one of the older goblins. I think you ought to come see this. With a final groan of aggravation, she released the pallet. She brushed off her hands and stood. I know it's hard to concentrate with battles below, but the whole reason we're trying to get the stone into place is to save us all from the battle. And unless I have some help from you. Her admonition broke off mid-sentence as she stared down past scabby heads, past the gleaming edge of the temple, past even the western wall of the city, to the cliff face. There, dark figures bounded, attacking the Thran soldiers who climbed. They seemed black fleas and white lice. The black fleas were incredibly nimble. They swarmed in, and wherever they went, Thran fell to their deaths. More artifact creatures. More machines. Rebek mused. Surely not. All of Halcyon's mechanical defenders, aside from the sand crabs, were Glacian's designs. Rebek knew all of her husband's work. Nothing like this had ever appeared. Still, what else could it be? They must be machines. Nah. Them's people, the old goblin said. People? Rebek asked. Yep. People. That's what Yawgmoth does to M. Changes M. Makes M into Phyrexians. Phyrexians, Rebek echoed. She had seen minor mutation hypertrophy, giantism, but nothing like this. Tens of thousands of Halcydes had thronged to Phyrexia, and this is what Yawgmoth was doing with them? Rebek wandered away from the spot, shock making her arms and legs numb. I knew he was improving them, but this. There were no sounds of battle here in the temple, but all that went on in the city was shown in prismatic sections through the structure. Rebek saw more moving forms. Loping, scuttling, capering, vaulting inhuman figures making their way down the streets. Her feet felt as if they belonged to someone else as she plodded to the eastern overlook. There, troops marched down Council Boulevard. One side of the street was filled with Halcite guards, and the other with Phyrexian guards. As severe and frightening as the Halcite guards were in their silver armor, the Phyrexian troops were not even recognizably human. Fangs, claws, antennae, stingers, hackles, manes. It was a surreal procession. At the head of the two columns were their commanders. This is what he is doing to them, Rebek said, disbelieving. The columns halted on the steps of the council hall. Commander Jix and the Halcite guard commander strode up to the first landing. One of Jix's Phyrexians came with them. It was a hulking figure, 2 heads taller than the commanders. Its head was a huge ball of muscle. Dagger-sized teeth resided behind a grotesquely swollen jaw. Its arms hung to its knees, and it hunched upstairs too small for its clawed feet. Jix was addressing the troops. Rebek could hear nothing. His speech was angry, his gestures clipped. In the end, he gestured the Halcite guard commander to his knees. The man reluctantly dropped. The Phyrexian beast loomed forward. Rebek cringed away. She closed her eyes and hid them in her hands. That man's death, that man's blood, would gleam in a million facets all around her. A voice broke the silence, the voice of the old goblin. Mistress Rebek. Come see. One of them ape people's got Lord Yawgmoth. It's carrying him on up to the city. Lord Yawgmoth is alive. Climbing to her feet, Rebek lifted her eyes toward the bright heavens so she would see none of the atrocities taking place below. She staggered toward the control stone. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and through a tight throat she shouted. Get over here, all of you. Get over here. We've got to get the stone in place.